Okay, calm down.
Not to focus on Amy Schumer again, but I think her social media is illustrative of a certain perspective that we're seeing. And there's so much Hasbara out there, which is like explanation.
Yeah, explanation
Yeah.
in the sense of propaganda.
Right, it's right, yeah.
It's a thin line between explanation and propaganda.
Yeah. So she shared this infographic Instagram thing. Everyone is asking what is going to happen to innocent civilians in Gaza? Where can they go? Israel's stance. Israel wants to evacuate as many innocent civilians from Gaza as possible. Why? Israel intends to minimize civilian casualties. Hamas intentionally embeds itself within civilian areas, making it exceptionally difficult for Israel to target them without harming civilians. Israel often refrains from striking Hamas targets like hospitals and schools where it knows Hamas is hiding or holding weapons. The IDF routinely warns civilians to evacuate before it bombs and gives locals detailed instructions on how to evacuate.
I'm going to just stop you there. I would say of the last 40 years of my life, about 80% was devoted to reading human rights reports. Right. Not once, not twice. I read most of them around 3 times. So I can say with a certain amount of certitude that the statements I'm going to make to you now have a lot of documentary authority. Yes. They command a lot of documentary authority. If you take the case of the human shielding, you go back and you look, for example, I'm taking one example, there are many. If you take the case of human shielding, Amnesty International, after Operation Cast Lead, put out an extensive report. It was titled 22 Days of Death and Destruction. And it looked at the question of human shielding because that came up already in 2008 during Operation Cast Lead. Yeah, it was a huge talking point.
And still is, yeah.
Amnesty International found that there was no evidence that Hamas had engaged in human shielding. However, that's only half the story. The other half of it is there was extensive evidence that Israel engaged in human shielding. It forced Palestinians to sit by tanks and artillery as they were fired. It walked Palestinians and fired from the shoulders of Palestinians. It stood in windows, it puts the Palestinians in windows and fired behind them. So Ms. Schumer is twice wrong. There was no evidence on the strict issue of human shielding that Hamas engaged in it. There is a lot of evidence that Israel engaged in it. Human shielding is a narrow term. I should say it's a term of art. It doesn't have like a scientific precision, but it usually means when you conscript a civilian to commit an unwanted act in the course of war. Is there evidence that Hamas fired weapons? It's a separate issue in the human rights literature, though I acknowledge these are not scientifically precise terms. Did Hamas fire from areas which were densely populated? And the answer is yes. However, in general, there was nowhere. This is Gaza.
Yeah, it's a very dense place.
There wasn't a place to fire from. And I'm not going to go into all the technical points because there are so many gradations.
Right.
In my book, I go through each gradation one by one to cover all possible challenges.
Yeah.
Now, the evidence is overwhelming. In fact, I would say the evidence was shocking of Israel's targeting, not just of hospitals where there were no militants present, but what was particularly appalling was the targeting of the ambulances. Now, I will give you an example of what this targeting looked like. Israel would target a civilian home, no evidence that there were any Hamas militants present in the home. The home is struck, people run out, and when they run out, they call the ambulance. Israel waits for the ambulance to come and then fires rockets at the ambulance. The most damning descriptions of what happened during those operations, they came from the Israeli soldiers. Go back and read, I'll give you the title slowly. Breaking the Silence. Read all they did was report what the soldiers told them during Operation Protective Edge. So it's going to be roughly 2014 or 2015. I won't comment further. Read it yourself. I couldn't bear it, or I was being ripped apart reading it. And bear in mind, these soldiers were not peaceniks.
Right.
Not at all. They expressed no regrets. There was only one soldier in the 201 pages. That's what my memory tells me. I think it's right. Only one soldier in the 201 pages who expressed any regret. They were just matter of fact.